Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim, to another shiur, weekly Parashat shiur with Zera Shimshon. And I want to thank all the people who have been involved in making this happen on a weekly basis. This has been dedicated for Zera Shel Kayama, for all those who need it. As we mentioned previously, Zera Shimshon was one of the great Italian Rabbanim of the time of HaRav Chaim HaKadosh, and he was considered a very capable individual. He was the Rav and the Moreh Hora'ah of several communities, and unfortunately he did not have children. The last, he had one child that died tragically, and he dedicated his life to publishing his Hidushim, and he's one of the unique individuals who takes responsibility for whoever learns his sefer, that he will actually take them in, adopt them as his children, and he promises to be there and work on their behalf and be their advocate in Shamayim, especially for Zera Shel Kayama, for Shiduchim. These are the things that he writes. Hence, the limud today is in the zchut of Zera Shel Kayama for Eldad ben Manaz Miriam, Bracha bat Marcel Dina, Tila bat Bracha Afsanem, Yonatan ben Faridem, Ariel Yochai ben Afsanem, Esther bat Romina, Ariel ben Angela, Esther bat Flora, Nisim ben Avraham, and for Zivug Hagun for Ezra ben Marcel Dina, Sarah bat Penina, Israel ben Sarah, Ahuva bat Sipora, Devorah bat Ronit, Navat Hilam, and has specifically been dedicated also for Refuah Shlema of Rachel bat Nahid, that should have a full recovery, a Refuah Shlema. Amen. So this week's Parashat Vayigash, we're going to study Ma'amar Gimel, the third essay that the Zera Shimshon writes, and that's about the very famous encounter of Yosef with his brothers, whereupon he actually identifies himself as Yosef. He's being back and forth several times with the brothers. They don't recognize him. They don't know who he is. For them, he is the viceroy of Egypt. He's the man in power, running and governing the greatest government of the time. The Egyptian empire at the time was the mightiest empire of the world, and Yosef was running it basically. Raka kiseh gdal bimecha. Paro had told him, had basically given him his tabat, his stamp, and he said, "You do whatever you want. Raka kiseh gdal bimecha. The only recognition between me and you would be that I sit on the throne. Basically, you run the government," and that's Yosef. And he was micromanaging everything that was going in the sale of produce and the government of Egypt at the time. Partially because he wanted to catch the brothers when they come. He knew that they're going to be coming. So they came. He accuses them of being meraglim, of spies. They, of course, beg to differ. They go back and forth. They say, we have 12 brothers. One is not here, has been missing. The other one is in Eretz Canaan with our father. He says, you have to bring him. They bring Binyamin. And back and forth. He puts his goblet there. He wants to now keep him as a slave, and the brothers, they can't let Binyamin stay there. Yaakov, for over a year, didn't want to let him go even. And said, if something happens to him, our father is going to be dead, Yehuda says. And finally, Yosef cannot hold himself back. He's an emotional person. He has already been going in the back room and crying several times, and this time he already couldn't hold back, and he kicks out everyone, and he tells them, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef, Ha'od Avichai, is our father, my father still alive. So that's really the essay, the third ma'amar of Zera Shimshon is going to be on this, and he asks multiple questions, 5 different questions, an array of Timihod says, well, how does this whole thing make sense? what Yosef did. And once you go through it, you'll see that every one of the questions are really a legit question. Says the Zera Shimshon, he brings the whole midrash, Vayomer Yosef elechav, and Yosef, ha'od avichai. And he says they couldn't, velo yachlu la'anot oto ki nivhalu mipanav, they couldn't answer because they were, flabbergasted. They completely were confused from his face. And the midrash, in Midrash Rabbah says, Oy lanu miyom hadin, oy lanu miyom hatochacha, the famous words of Midrash, woe to us, says the Midrash, from the day of judgment. Woe to us from the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us tochacha. He chastises us in Yom Hadin after Me'avet Ve'esrim, after 120. And the Midrash explains, Yosef Ktanan Shel Shvatim, Yosef was the youngest of the Shvatim, short of Binyamin. All the other Shvatim from the other mothers, they're all older than Yosef. And yet, Lo Yachlu Echav La'anot Oto, they couldn't answer him when he chastised them. So imagine, K'sheyavo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yochiach Echad Ve'echad, Kol Echad Ve'echad Lefi Ma'asav, and Hashem in Yom Adin is going to chastise everyone based on their actions, their Ma'asim. Alachat Kama V'chama. Can you imagine how embarrassing that would be? That's the famous midrash that everyone has heard. So says the Zera Shimshon, wait a second, let's analyze this together, step at a time. Sarich Iyun. First question is, Ma sorech l'ra'aya? Why do you need a proof for the fact that we will be embarrassed when HaKadosh Baruch Hu chastises us in Yom Adin after Me'av Esrim? Of course we're going to be embarrassed, right? Or you need this story. If it wasn't because of a story of Yosef, we would not be. It will be any less embarrassing to confront the din, the judgment of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, it would be difficult. What's the she'elah? Of course, it would be difficult. Ve'halo hu davar pashut she'asechir mechayvo. Ve'al korchach lomar she'amidrash rotze lilmod mipasuk zeh ezu svara chadasha. We must say that there's an element of embarrassment that we learn from Yosef that did not exist previously without the story of Yosef. So we have to figure out what that is. That's A. B, the second question is, why does Yosef have to say, Ha'od avichai? Ha'od avichai means, you, with selling me, you have put him through such pain and agony that it must be that he's dead already. And is that conducive to what Yosef is trying to do? Yosef is going to be right after this, he's going to go hug and kiss everyone. He's going to cry on their shoulders. He's going to make them feel good. He's going to try to be there for them. So you certainly don't want to put, insult and injury. So why are you saying, Ha'od avichai? What's the point of asking, is my father still alive? Right? That's the second question. The third question is, they already told him many times, Hashalom avdecha avinu odenu hai. They said, your servant, our father, is still alive. He's peaceful, he's good. They said it multiple times. So why are you asking again? 5 minutes ago they said he's good. So what's the point of asking again immediately after you say, I'm Yosef, you add, is my father alive? And then the fourth question is, why does he say Avi, not Avinu? He's excluding himself. He says, is my father alive? Or the other brothers are chopped liver and it's not their father? Of course, it's their father too. So say Avinu, Ha'od Avinu Chai. Why Ha'od Avichai? Right? And the final question he asks, the fifth one, is, when he says, Velo Yachlu La'anot Oto, they couldn't answer him. Ki nivhalu mipanav, because they were confused from his face. What answer? It seems like they had an answer, but they couldn't answer because they were nivhal, they were confused. What answer could they give? I mean, these are questions he asked that doesn't really have much of an answer. Okay, So then he brings, and this is really a Gemara in Chagiga. He does not bring the Gemara, but the Gemara in Chagiga, in Daf Dalet Amud Bet, the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer, whenever he would get to this pasuk of Ani Yosef Ha'od Avichai, he would start crying. And he would say the same thing as the Midrash says pretty much. Says, Yosef gave a little, thing to them, a little introduction, and they couldn't answer. Imagine what happens in Yom Adin when HaKadosh Baruch Hu confronts us. Right? Now, we have to also ask our own question here, and that is when the Midrash and the Gemara say that Oy lanu miyom adin, Oy lanu miyom hatochacha, because Yosef gave a chastising talk, and imagine how we would answer HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he would chastise us. Yosef didn't chastise them. All Yosef said was, Ani Yosef, I'm Yosef. I mean, he had to introduce himself at some point. He didn't say any word of musar. He didn't say, why did you say... On the contrary, he says, don't think that you sold me here. Hashem did it, right? On the contrary, he did everything that you wouldn't do when you want to give musar. This is not your fault, right? Hashem wanted me to keep so many people alive. Look at what happened. Amazing ending. Don't worry. That's what Yosef does the whole time. And Maharsha really asks this question over there in Daf Dalit. The Maharsha says, yes, he didn't give them any musar, but he could have. Once they know that he is Yosef and he's so mighty and he's so powerful, they were afraid. That's what Maharsha writes. We will soon see that many Baalei Musar, right, in Sefer Or Yahel, others, they say something much more simple, which really will be the culmination of what we will discuss today. But first, let's just take a few moments and go through what the Zera Shimshon is going to have to offer on this question. So it says, the Zera Shimshon, Vayigash Lomar, he brings the Gemara in Masechet Ktuvot, Daf Chav Zayin Amud Bet. The Gemara there has a story that Rav Mari Bar Itzak, he had a father that passed away. He had the estate of the father. The assets all went to him. And all of a sudden, a brother shows up from nowhere, right? He says, I'm your brother. Let's divide 50-50, right? And he's like, brother who? I don't know you from Joe. Like, so they go to Din Torah, right? The Gemara says, I don't know you, who you are. I don't know who you are. And they went together to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said to the newcomer, he said, he's right. You say that you were here. You say that you were here. And then you left with your father. And that's why he doesn't recognize you. But, so you were young. It's not that he is denying your existence, but he says that he doesn't recognize you, just like the brothers didn't recognize Yosef, right? And he says, Dichtiv, Vayaker Yosef et Echa, vehem lo yikiru. Yosef recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. You recognize him because he was older. He doesn't recognize you because, when you left, you were a kid. So he doesn't know if you are the brother or not, right? And the Tosafot over there, in the Matril Shapir, כתבו התוספות, שפיר קאמר לך, זה שבא נולד כאן, והלך עם אביו למדינת הים, ועתה כשחזר ואמר, לא ידענה לך, מחזיק כשקרא. Tosafot basically says, explains this based on the story of Yosef. And it seems from the Tosafot that if you know that you had a brother, I was a baby, and you remember the facial features and so on, if you really, really pay attention, you would be able to tell, this is, sounds about right. This is that brother. Now I have to, in my mental graphics, I have to put some beard here and some mustache there and a little bit adult features on the face. But you can figure it out if you really want to. Then he explains this based on this Tosafot in the Gemara. V'kan kvar haya yodei Yosef. He's going to go on to answer all the 5 questions together. And he says like this. V'kan kvar haya yodei Yosef she'echav lo hayu makirim oto. Here Yosef knew that they're not recognizing him because they have been speaking for hours. They had the entire Seudah together and he's schmoozing with them. And he has done a lot of strange things to them. For instance, he sat them in front of himself. Ha-bechor ki bchorato v'asa'ir kis'irato. Right? He had this goblet and he would bang on the goblet, says, you sit here, Reuben. Right? You sit next to him, Shimon. You sit next to him, Levi. He's sat everybody based on their chronological birth time. And they thought that this guy is a genius, Ruach HaKodesh, Ruach HaTum'ah, I don't know what. But he really knew. He knew this is Reuben, this is Shimon, this is Levi. And they're seeing all of this. And it never occurred to them that this is Yosef. So he knew that they don't know him. He knew that they don't recognize him as being Yosef. Therefore, he was concerned. So I guess I'm Yosef. They say Boro Baba. Like, what are we talking about? Yosef. So he had to have a proof for them immediately after he introduces himself to them, right? Now, we find that he actually used other proofs as well. He started speaking Lashon HaKodesh with them. Then he showed them the Brit Milah. He did a lot of different things because he had to actually prove that he's right. They didn't want to believe him. He thought at least, right? So therefore, immediately when he says Ani Yosef, he has to prove. He says, Ha'od Avichai. He tells them, look, you should be able to think. Now that I'm telling you I'm Yosef, try to think back how Yosef looked when he was 17 years old, when you sold him, right? And I'm telling you all the details of you threw me this and you sold me afterwards. There's only one way that I know what you did with your brother, right? Now think, and you'll see the features you could match the face that you knew 22 years ago, right? That's A. And B, if you don't remember, Ha'od Avichai. If my father is he will definitely recognize me. So even if you have trouble recognizing who I am for Yosef, our father would most definitely be able to put the picture together. He would recognize me as being his son. So that is the beginning things. And that's why he says, Avi, he explains, now we'll get to it in just a moment, the Ramu Nafshaihu, he was waiting for them to say, whoa, yeah, of course we recognize, this is Yosef. Right? He was waiting for that. And the truth is they did. Right? The truth is they did. I believe when the Pasuk says, Ki nivhalu mipanav, is they couldn't believe that they didn't recognize him. Nivhalu mipanav, they looked at him, they're like, of course this is Yosef. Right? Which now adds a layer of question, how in the world they didn't see it? Why it becomes worse in just a moment. If you give me a moment, this becomes one of those questions that, like, once you put the chazals together, you sit back, you're like, oh, wait a second, how did this exactly happen? But hold on to that for just a moment. They had what to say because they recognized this is Yosef, but they couldn't answer him because they were speechless because of the busha. And says Zera Shimshon, the busha was twofold. Not just because of what had happened between them, but for the fact they were so embarrassed that they didn't recognize him for all this time. They've been going and coming for a whole year, sitting with him, eating with him, talking with him, and they couldn't recognize him. You know what the embarrassment that is? Right? The brother that who you wronged and you can't even recognize him anymore. That's a double busha. Right? Now hold on to this. And that's what the Midrash says. Oy lanu miyom adin, oy lanu miyom hatochacha. Woe to us from the din and the tochacha of Hashem. Says the Zera Shimshon, it's not just the onesh, it's not the reward and punishment that we are saying woe to us because of the no. Is the woe, the second level of it that we learn from here is the fact that we didn't recognize the averot when we were doing them, right? It's one thing to not listen to Hashem. But the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done all these good with us and for us, and you didn't even recognize the avirot, right? Because Sheba'olam hazeh, I read from him, ha'avirot enam domot be'enenu la'avirot. In Olam hazeh we do avirot. It looks like a mitzvah, right? Okay, we have ways of rationalizing and explaining things away. We're extremely creative. Extremely creative. I'm doing this. Of course, I'm going to speak negatively about him. He, Rasha Merusha, Ben Benoshel Esa. And we have, like, if you don't speak Lashon about him, you're doing an Avera. Right? People should know and stay away. But truth is, when all of the thing shatters, when the facade of the world goes away, and you realize it's all because I was selfish. I was watching for myself. It's not because he was really bad, or it was really mutar to trash him, or to speak, or to steal from him, or to, all those things. B'yom adin, omnam b'yom adin, k'shnakir ba'atzmenu ha'averot sha'asinu. When there's no bias, all of those facades just fall down, and you see it for what it was. And all those averot, now you recognize, this was avera. How can I miss this? How can I miss that? And now you're confronted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who said not to do them. It is so much more. It's more than just the onish, but it's the embarrassment of how can we live? We live the life without paying any attention to what's an avera, without caring about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a whole different layer of busha that's going to be there. La'akiram ba'olam hazeh. And that's the Gemara says. The Gemara says really in Sukkah Daf Nun Bet. The Gemara says in Olam Haba, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings the judgment, the Reshaim look at Yetzer Hara and they see Yetzer Hara was like a little thread. It was nothing. And they still went after it. Tzadikim see it as a mountain. See, the Yetzer Hara was this massive mountain, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped them conquer it. Reshaim see that they had nothing. All this facade that they made, Yetzer Hara was after all just the facade, just the front. If you would boo it, it would go away. It was an image, not a reality, just a little thread. And that adds so much more pain, says the Gemara, to the pain of Olam Haba that the Reshaim have to endure, because they see it was nothing. The whole thing was just the front. The whole thing was like a make-believe, right? So that's what the Zera Shimshon says. Then he actually adds one level of what he said. Avi, inami, or lefi shaya diuklo shel Yosef domeh shel aviv. Because Yosef looked like his father. Rashi says this. Ben Zekunim Hulo, the Targum writes that he looked exactly, it was a carbon copy of Yaakov. There's a carbon copy of Yaakov Avinu. And Yaakov was a carbon copy of Yitzchak. So it really comes out that Yitzchak and Avraham also was like that. So we have chazals for each one of them. So really, they had seen Avraham, they'd seen, the kids had not seen Avraham, but they had seen Yitzchak, they'd seen Yaakov, right? So therefore, Amar lahem ani Yosef. I am Yosef. And if you don't believe me, just think to yourself when your father was a little younger, right? He says, you know my father. If my father is still alive, it's just I'm a younger version of his face. He also has a beard. So when I was 17, I didn't have a beard, but Yaakov does, and I have. So now you could see the similarity. Now this, I find this to be very difficult. It's a question that I grappled with for many years. Now, he's one that puts it together, but he even doesn't ask it as sharply as you should. The obvious question is, when you have the Targum, you have Rashi, that Yosef was a carbon copy of Yaakov Avinu, how does the whole thing start? For a year they've been going and coming back, and they're speaking to this guy, looking at the portrait of their father when he got married, when he was a little younger, and they're not seeing it. How in the world is that possible? And it's so obvious that, according to him, Yosef is using that to prove himself. He says, look at me, and imagine your father a little younger. We are a carbon copy of each other. So of course I am Yosef. Right? And especially based on what we said, Ki nivalu mipanav is, they looked at him, they're like, oh my God, look at this. Of course this is Yosef. How can we miss it? So the obvious question is, how did they miss it? How in the world can you look at your own father's image and not recognize that we're coming to Egypt, we're looking for Yosef? The Midrash says Yosef asked him in the beginning, he said, this one brother of yours that you see is missing. And he was sold to Mitzrayim. What do you do if you find him? So we are here actually to find. The Midrash says they entered 10 different gates to go and search every area and neighborhood and nook and cranny in Mitzrayim for Yosef. They were on a mission to find Yosef. They wanted him. So you're looking for him. You're hoping he's alive. He's standing in front of you, alive and well. You're looking at the image of your father and you're not seeing Yosef. How in the world is that possible? How in the world is that possible? A good question. The truth is, I think that is the core element of the musar that Yosef was giving them without saying a word. Because you could go through a life and have the greatest facts written in front of you, black on white, beyond any shadow of a doubt, and you're looking at them. But all you see is what you want to see. The brothers did not want to see Yosef at the helm of the government of Egypt. Because remember, that was their whole machloket. They thought that Yosef was a Rasha. The Siporno writes that in our parasha that we just had, in Miketz, when Reuben tells them, he says, we are sinners because 21 years ago when Yosef was begging us, was pleading with us, we should have listened. We didn't care. We didn't have Rahmanut. When he was begging and pleading, says the Sipporah, they were not regretting for a moment the decision. They still held that he was a Rasha. He was a Chayav Mitah. They're just saying, we should have had compassion the way we dealt with it. But not a moment of regret on their decision. For them to see Yosef as a viceroy of Egypt would have been to say that you were right. When you dreamt the two dreams of stars and sun and the moon bowing, of the bundles of wheat bowing to you, you were right. You were not a Rasha. You were a tzaddik. They were not willing to go against their life's mission. So they're looking Yosef in the eye, seeing all the signs of him being a carbon copy of their father, and they don't see it. Because we are so capable when we're biased to turn and twist every single thing for our benefit of what we want to see, not what actually is there to be seen. And Yosef did not have to give them any musar. All he had to say was, Ani Yosef. I'm Yosef. Now you have to go back 22 years and realize that everything that you stood for was sheker. Every cheshbon that you made was a fault, was an error. You have to now look yourself well in the mirror and reconsider your entire life. And that's exactly what's going to happen after 120 when a person looks back at life. And you have to confront all of those decisions when Hashem says, okay, I'm Hashem. Now there is din v'chashbon. We know what's right and wrong. We just are very good at ignoring it during the life itself. And that's the message of Parashat Vayigash. the most emotionally beautiful piece of Chumash, is also the scariest part of it. Because there will be a reckoning time where the person has to look themselves up in the mirror and say, oh, okay, this was Yosef. It was not, it was not some viceroy, some rasha, some goy. And that's the greatest single musar in the world. In the world. Because we all know what's right and what's wrong. But just like Bilam, the Midrash really gives the example of brothers of Yosef, and also Bilam. Bilam is faced with the greatest single nes. A nes so big that the opportunity of that nes had to be created from Sheshadim Bereshit, from the beginning of the creation. Pia Aton had to be created. And he's talking to this donkey. Imagine a donkey that starts speaking with you. Imagine you go in the morning, you try to start your car, it doesn't start, you give it a kick, and it starts talking to you. He says, why are you kicking me? Can you imagine what will happen? You pass out. But you know what he does? He starts like delivering a negotiation, a back and forth with the donkey. It's fool. Here's a shoteh. A crazy person. And Chazal say he was the smartest capacity of human mind ever compared to Moshe Rabbeinu. Can you imagine that? But yes, when you don't want to see something, you won't see it. And he stands there negotiating with this donkey. He says, I will kill you if I had a sword. And he gets frustrated with it. Instead of saying, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, Baruch B'chayei Metim, and bowing to Hashem and returning from his wrong way. No, still going. Because if you don't want to see it, you could have Yosef staring you in your eyes and you're seeing your father and you still don't recognize it. And that's the scary part. How much a person has to be awakened and alert to go through life with proper antennas, not with lenses of bias, but with asking, growing, learning, asking the Torah. And that's really a tremendous lesson, Be'ezrat Hashem, for us all to learn and grow from. Amen. Hazak Baruch.